All right, I guess today is a double feature. I just did a podcast earlier, and unfortunately, I'm using my third mic, and I was holding it. It works good, but when I hold it, it bangs around and made a lot of noise. So I'm pondering redoing that one, but for now, I'll leave it. It's got some good stuff in it. I'm proud of it. Just you hear me banging the mic around all the time. So hopefully, I've come up with a solution to stop that. And one thing I did miss that I want to include is a little bit of knowledge on what's going on in Turkey, because there's been at least 6 days of unrest there. And I've done a little bit of research there, so I'll share what I know about Turkey. Obviously, Turkey is a very important country. Has a very good military. It was NATO's southern flank against the Soviet Union for a long time. America sold Turkey a lot of modern weapons, and they're starting to produce some indigenous stuff that's pretty good. They've got a strong military tradition going back to the Ottoman Turks, the Ottoman Empire. In World War I, they pretty much creamed the British at Gallipoli. So, on a military perspective, that's kind of where they are. On a societal perspective, Turkey's kind of an interesting place. At one point in its past, there was a guy named Mustafa Kemal, who's better known in Turkey as Ataturk, or the father of Turkey. And although he's kind of got a checkered past, he didn't exactly treat the Armenians very well. He wasn't the guy responsible for the main genocides, but when he took over Turkey, he did some cleanup on the Armenians, so he's not guilt-free. But basically what he did is he made the decision for Turkey. He said, we're going to be a modern, secular state. You know, we're not as a people going to stop being Muslim, but we're going to keep Muslim out of government. And he went a long way to creating a modern, secular state, and he's very highly regarded in Turkey. But over time, what happened in Turkey is Turkey kind of degenerated a little bit. The Kemalists, or Kemalists, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, are basically the secularists. And unfortunately, they became kind of corrupt, and the political science term developed out of Turkey called the deep state, or the state within a state. You know, the group that's really in control behind the scenes. I actually use that term now in a lot of context outside of Turkey. But kind of what happened is the Kemalists were bad. They were corrupt. They were kind of brutal as far as keeping power. They were very much in line with the military, and pretty much how politics went in Turkey in modern history from, I don't know, say World War after Mustafa Kemal left, to kind of the modern spot where Turkey finds itself, is normally what would happen is you have the Kemalists be in charge, and they would be corrupt, and they would, you know, have secret police going around kidnapping people and crushing opposition. But eventually it would just get to the point where it was too much, and then the military would step in and overthrow a government, set up a new regime, step back out of politics, let that go until it became corrupt, and kind of rinse and repeat. So kind of what happened in Turkey is the average person would fully expect that if the government got out of control, that the military would step in and clean it up. Turkey's a society kind of like ours that has a very high regard to the military. In fact, in Turkey, they have mandatory military service for all males, although now, from what I understand, it's pretty easy to get out of for elites if they don't want to do it. But there's a high regard for the military, and so the way people voted a lot of the times would be protest votes against the secularists because of their corruption. So they'd vote for these radical Islamic parties, and fully expecting them never to be able to fully gain control of society, voting for them as a protest vote, expecting that if these regimes got in power and they went too far down the line of Islamic fascism, that the military would step in and kick them out. What's happening in modern Turkey, post-Russian collapse, is that Turkey really wants to join the European Union. And unfortunately, I think the European Union are kind of racist and probably won't let that happen, especially since it's probably about to collapse and fall apart anyway. But Turkey's really set on joining the EU, and part of the way they can do that is they have to meet certain conditions, like not having the military step in and having a coup every 10 years or so. So the military has been very reluctant to step in. So the people voted for the Islamic Party. I forget which one Erdogan belongs to. I think it starts with a P. And Erdogan has done what typically the Islamic parties do, is they start over time enforcing Islamic rule and Islamic ways of doing things into the secular realm. And it goes against what most people in Turkey view Turkey as being, the separation between church and Islamic religion there is supposed to be iron-fisted, but Erdogan basically is overstepped. He said that there's no alcohol now, but between X amount of spaces between schools and mosques. The military was about to throw him out, but he did a purge of the military, got rid of a lot of general staff officers, which ticked a lot of people off. That's not why your average person's protesting. So what kind of sparked this protest, from what I understand, is there was this one park, this nice green area in Istanbul that, through corporatism, just like in this country, Erdogan and his buddies decided that they would, pave it over and do something else. So a bunch of people started protesting that. But it kicked off a larger spark of just frustration with Erdogan's regime, how it's going down the Islamic path and breaking the separation between a secular state and Islamic religion. And a lot of people are fearful of that, and that's why they're protesting. So that's from me reading a couple books on Turkey and doing some research. So what to expect? Again, because of the European Union aspect, the military is not going to be real keen on stepping in, especially when Erdogan already did a purge of a lot of the senior staff that almost stepped in last time. But it's still a possibility. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. 6 days with 3,000 people hurt. I believe thousands of people arrested. Not sure if the protests are spreading beyond Istanbul at this point. So it's a very interesting thing and something very much to watch. Turkey to me has always been a fascinating place. It's kind of like, which way are they going to go? Are they going to go towards the EU, or are they going to go towards their own thing? Where that's maybe kind of where Erdogan was headed. A lot of people calling him the new Ottoman Caliphate, or Ottoman Sultan. Maybe he was thinking of the greater Turkey as being a regional, if not global superpower. So all very interesting stuff. So that's just my 2 cents on Turkey for what it's worth. And I don't think I'm going to redo that other podcast I did tonight. Well, I'll do a real quick summation. If you've already listened to it, don't bother listening to the rest of it here, but I'll do a quick stop. I talked about Bilderberg, brief history of what it is. You can just Google Bilderberg and figure all that out. And I commented as to why I thought Bilderberg was kind of lifting up its skirts, so to speak, and kind of testing the waters about revealing itself. And I think it's because people accept it now, as I said in the podcast, in the 1950s, having American elites collude with elites of other nations to decide critical policies and decisions for the next year. Almost like an elite Politburo, except for instead of 5-year plans, they have 1-year plans. Back in the 50s, in America's heyday of power, that would have been considered treason. So all this stuff was kept highly under wraps. Where now I think that most Americans are so socially engineered through the schools and socialism and the benefits of a one world government, blah, 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 that most Americans would actually be relieved to see that it's not total chaos, that there is this group of elites that are controlling things, or trying to. I think they'd be relieved rather than enraged. So that's just an indicator of how far we've come. The other thing I talked about real quick was whistleblowers. 4 reasons I think they're still alive. One is deniability. Obviously if they killed the whistleblowers, that would show that obviously there are these powerful groups that do exist. That would be kind of a psychotic self-fulfilling prophecy if you just claim that without contextual information. I talked about how whistleblowers do actually get whacked, and there's evidence of that. Not only whacked, but threatened, and it's not so far-fetched to think that powerful groups of people might suicide other people to get them to quit resisting their agenda. So that was number one. Number two was whistleblowers act as a barometer. If you do have this massive plan to re-engineer the world and have infiltrators infiltrate, religion, government, banks, education, it serves your interest to understand how covert your agenda is being kept. Is there leaks? Are people finding out too much? So whistleblowers act as barometers. Whistleblowers also, number three, was act as conduits of information. Talked about owning your opposition and, a little bit of poison. I used the Zeitgeist example where Zeitgeist has some great information in it about New World Order, control mechanism, stuff like that. But it talks a lot about Christianity being this sun god cult based on ancient Egyptian religion. And, there's great videos that debunk that. And that's kind of like a good example of mixing a little bit of poison with a lot of sugar, where you can be a total expert on the New World Order, but if you fail to have Jesus as your Savior, then your life, in my opinion, is a tragedy. And that Zeitgeist series is a prime example of giving a lot of sugar but mixing a lot of poison and disinformation. The last thing was ritualistic. It seems like on a spiritual level that if people announce what they're going to do ahead of time and people don't resist and try to push back, it's almost like you're on a subconscious or semi-conscious level consenting to what people are announcing they're going to do to you, which might give the New World Order types who are trying to reshape the world kind of more power to do something. Maybe in the spiritual realm there's normally a hedge of protection that normally keeps nations and people safe. But if these guys announce that they want to change things and people don't bother to resist, maybe that gives them, on a spiritual level, power to overcome those that hedge of protection that normally would be there. And again, this is all speculative on my part. And then I talked about free speech in Islam. There was a lawyer that came out and said that if you attack Islam or criticize it, that could be violating Muslim civil rights. Obviously, that blows apart the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech. So I rallied against that. I think that lawyer should be obviously removed from his position. I don't think, you should attack people as individuals and totally harass them, but there's a difference between tolerance and acceptance. Tolerance is me tolerating you even though I think you're wrong, and I'm totally entitled to believe that you're wrong. I just don't give you a hard time about it as long as you live peacefully with me. Where acceptance would be that I have to accept what you think as just as legitimate as what I think. And I think a lot of people in this country get acceptance and tolerance mixed up. I think as a society of differing individuals that's diverse, tolerance is great, but when people try to force acceptance on other people of things that's wrong and goes against the Constitution, and I stand against that. So that's pretty much recapping what I talked about. So anyway, I hope you have a good night. Calling it short. Take care.